All right, well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Tonight I was hoping to have sort of a casual conversation about, short-term rentals in Sudden Valley, some of the issues and some of the things that are working, some of the problems that maybe you've heard from other people or maybe personal experiences. So I'm hoping today just to sort of set a baseline so that in our future meetings we can discuss maybe solutions and then maybe getting these solutions in front of um, the members of our community and the board and the guests of these short-term rental um, homes. So today, it's pretty much just kind of getting to know each other and forming a baseline so that we're all working from the same place and working to the same goals. So maybe we could start off by introducing ourselves and sort of giving a brief reason why you wanted to be a part of this. And then we'll go a little deeper into experiences with STRs. So.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Mark Fairhart. I moved here, my wife and I moved to Sudden Valley in 2019. I own a home on Sofield Park. I don't know if you know where that is. That's a small park just north of the marina on the water. I also own 2 rental homes in Sudden Valley. They are rented by the month, so the short-term rental situation doesn't affect me, and it won't affect me. I have no interest in managing properties like that. Hear me okay? Okay.
Mary.
So for me, the reason I'm here is that we live on a park. It's a small park, but it's not like we have just 1 or 2 neighbors around us. We have about a dozen homes around the park. And when there's noise out there, we hear it. We love living on the park. Days like today, there are people down there having fun. But over the last couple years, I've noticed that there's just a lot of activity in the park and around the park. A few months ago, I did a little research and I figured out that within 200 feet of where we live, there are potentially 50 short-term rental clients who could live there. One house across from us that was owned, well, we'll get into all the details. So I'm here because I just think there need to be some restrictions.
Yeah. Yeah.
My name is Michael DeVolio. My wife and I have been residents of Sudden Valley for a little more than 8 years now. We started in Gate 5 and now we're in Gate 1. We started renting, now we own. I have been a professional planner for 45 years, a municipal planner, currently working for the town of LaConner. Just finished about 8 months ago drafting new short-term rental regulations for the town of LaConner.
Wow.
And I have also done similar work in many other communities across the country. So I do have a lot of familiarity with the issue. I will tell you that in LaConner, the decision was made based on strong community input, that people in the neighborhoods didn't want the impact of short-term rentals, but also understood that as a tourism-based economy in LaConner, that we needed to accommodate them somehow. So we were able to do that and did it to everyone's satisfaction. My biggest concern is that people don't like to recognize this, but we're part of Whatcom County. And Whatcom County has very specific regulations about short-term rentals.
Yeah.
And we have, whatever we decide to do for Sudden Valley, I think we have to start by recognizing that we have to abide by the rules.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit as we go on.
That's my biggest concern, is that we have to follow the rules.
Yeah. Jane?
I'm Jane David. I live in Gate 5, and I've been here since 2021. I actually didn't realize that there were many short-term rentals in Sudden Valley at all until the last couple of years, because it just didn't strike me as a place people would come to rent.
There were many until
Yeah.
just a few years ago.
And I know that there are mountain bikers that come in that, rent houses for the weekend or whatever, and there are certainly examples of people who have family that come in who can't stay in their own home, so they stay on a rental, for a wedding or whatever. There's been only one near me, and it hasn't been a problem, other than the occasional garbage issues, and I think one noise issue once upon a time. But I think what made me realize what a problem this could become is that my daughter lives not in Sudden Valley, but in Glen Haven. And she had a lovely couple that lived next door to her that had a beautiful garden when she moved in, and then they decided to sell their house, and my daughter was so hopeful that a family would move in, but instead it was a family who bought the house for a short-term rental. They have people that are there for almost a month at a time. A lot of them are actually temporary workers. And the temporary workers don't care about what the outside of the house looks like or what the yard looks like. So it's basically become just a garden of weeds. It used to be a garden of flowers and a beautiful place. And instead of my daughter being able to walk out of the house and wave hi to her neighbor or go borrow a cup of sugar, there's this constant flow of strangers next door with big trucks, and they park in front of her house. And it's settled down a bit after she complained to the person who owns the house a few times. But I think it's important to realize that even though people do have the right to a certain extent to do what they want on their property, and I'm not going to say that somebody should never be able to have a short-term rental here, of course, but I think there does need to be a good set of restrictions about how that happens, and if we're even able to limit how many there could be, and also that we are good about enforcing the regulations we already have here about noise and garbage cans and that sort of thing. We're going to allow people to have short-term rentals.
Hi, I'm Barbara Michelson Harder, and we've been here since 2019, and we bought in 2017 and didn't move for 2 years because of family reasons where we were coming from, but we knew we were moving here. But while we rented it, we had a property manager, which was great. We had a local property manager, and they made sure that our renters, we had 2 sets of renters, and the first one actually turned out to be the renter from hell, but hey, looked good on paper. But the second set was great. And but we couldn't have done it without them, without the property management, because we lived down in the Bay Area in California. So it would have been very hard. And my experience with short-term rentals here has been what's happening on Western, because I go out Western a lot. That's my exit, gate 13. I'm in gate 13. And I know the people who live next door to the short-term rental, and there's been noise problems, a lot of people problems, a lot of car problems. And I don't think we should be able to say we can't have short-term rentals, but there definitely needs to be regulations and enforcement of the regulations. And just reading, and I guess that's all you want. I have other opinions, but that's all you want from me right now. So anyway.
Hi, my name is Ariel Silagi. I am a homeowner.
Sorry, say your last name again.
Silagi. It sounds easier than it looks. It's that SZ Hungarian voodoo. So I, like many of us, moved here from California. I've been told not to say that too loudly because people don't love the Californians coming to Washington and Oregon.
There's just the 6 of us here, right?
Just right, that's all. So I bought my home here after having discovered the Pacific Northwest and just found such a sense of nurturance and home here that I didn't feel when I was living in California. And I bought a really special home here that I fondly refer to as the tree house. It's kind of in the middle of streets. There's like a bazillion stairs to get to it. So it's a little bit secluded and feels very tree housey.
Is it one of the original houses?
It was built in 76. Yeah, so,
Ours is older. Ours is built in 74.
oh,
72.
should we have a competition? Who wins?
74.
Okay. And so, as someone who moved here as a single woman, I bought my house on my own, and it's one of my main things was, well, I want to be self-sufficient, I want to be independent, I want to find ways to be able to afford living on my own and having my own home. And so having chosen to live here and buy a house here, one of the things that I looked into as I was buying my house was, what are the policies on short-term rentals or long-term rentals? And one of the things that I realized was that the information is really not readily accessible. It's very challenging to dig through things, and there's a lot of just language that feels difficult to decipher. And as someone who, I find I would consider myself an intelligent person, and if I'm having a hard time understanding what the rules are, there's no way that I'm the only one that's experiencing that. And so I think irrespective of our individual stances, I think that whatever is decided as a collective needs to be clear and needs to be accessible to people and needs to be somewhere where people can find it. I had to go digging. I actually went to the Whatcom County Planning and Development Department to find the information that I ultimately found, which I'm sure you, forgive me your name?
Michael.
Michael, I'm sure is privy to that information, but I really had to go digging for it. Yes, there it is. So I think it would be just really nice if it was accessible for everybody, so that there didn't have to be this, well, it's allowed, but it's not allowed, but in Sudden Valley it's like this, but in Whatcom County it's like that. And as Michael said, I think first, we have to make sure that obviously we're in compliance with the county, and then from there we can create a set of rules that make sense for our community, which I'm a community builder. I have my own practice as a holistic health coach. I teach group fitness here. I love building communities and nurturing communities. And so in the interest of that, I think there must be also a way to help homeowners feel autonomous and like they're able to afford the cost of living here, which continues to always go up. And I think short-term rentals is a really smart way, short-term and long-term rentals is a really smart way to leverage our assets to be able to afford living, especially for those of us that are single homeowners. At the same time, though, being a community builder, I think it's really important that those two things coexist, being able to do what we can to afford our lifestyles and also not disrupt the community here and further contribute to community building here. So I'd love to help come to some type of understanding mutually about what makes sense so that everybody can be happy and on the same page.
I think you're in the right place here.
Good.
Anthony?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Singer. Thank you for allowing me to appear via Zoom tonight. I will be out there for some of these. I promise you that. I do look forward to meeting with everyone in person and getting to know you guys. So my wife and I bought our home in Sudden Valley around 3 years ago, and we intend to use that home as our retirement home at some point. We're still working towards that goal. We own rentals in Kansas. That's where we currently reside, that we rent out on a long-term basis. In purchasing the home in Sudden Valley, we were similar to Ariel, that we wanted to be able to own our vacation home, rent it out in a short-term basis when we're not there, partially for the income, but also partially because having owned rentals, we understand, and I'm sure the other people on the committee that own rentals know this, vacant homes create problems. You end up with kids or squatters or things like that, and there is a benefit to having the home occupied when we're not there. So that is kind of our background. We do intend to comply with every rule and regulation in Whatcom County. I believe we are in compliance with all of those. I know we've worked with the county on the permitting process, and I believe we're the first one to complete that process. We were a short-term rental before the ordinance went into effect, so we have a little bit different process that we were able to take advantage of than the than the normal permitting process. My wife, by the way, is out there. We're out there sometimes at different times. She's actually present there this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Daniel Rodriguez. I've lived here since, I guess about a little over 3 years. I live in Gate 5, Loganberry. I tell everybody that I'm in the highest house in Sudden Valley, which I think I am. I love it up there. I can see everything and hear the motorcycles. No matter where they are in the whole valley, I can hear them. And I love it here. And I was interested in getting involved in this task force because I've had neighbors move out from around me, and I was always terrified who was going to move in next door. You just never know what kind of neighbor you're going to get. I've been very fortunate, and the way I'm looking at this is for all of us to talk about imagining the short-term rentals as being our neighbors. What would we want? What would we not want? They're here. We're not trying to get rid of them, but we do want to regulate them. And like Ariel said, there's really no regulation right now. I mean, nobody knows what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do. I mean, there's common sense and politeness, but that sometimes has to be regulated. So that's why I got kind of interested in this. And there's been, being on the board, I've seen a lot of emails and people having comments about short-term rentals and what can we do about it? Can we get rid of them? What do we? And I know a lot of the problems that we're dealing with. So I thought we'd start off by talking about some of the issues that maybe experiences people have had on our task force to share with us, so we know what we're dealing with, what we're going to have to look into and maybe regulate. And we're not at all bashing on short-term rentals. At least that's not my attitude. But we do have to look at this with open eyes and understand what the issues are, because we have been getting complaints. We do have a responsibility to make sure that our neighbors and members have a nice, happy place to live in. I mean, this is such a gorgeous area, and it can be destroyed for somebody very easily by a bad neighbor. So we want to avoid having those bad neighbors and giving our neighbors and residents, members, recourse if they do have problems. So I think that's how we'll start out. So maybe we'll get into a little bit more. Sounds like everybody couldn't wait to start talking about issues or problems they've had, or good experiences too. So I guess let's go around again and maybe just turn this into a conversation and talk about some of the issues that Sudden Valley specifically. I mean, we probably, like, you already have some guidelines that you work with Connor. So we'll probably at some point come up with a baseline of what the base regulations are. But Sudden Valley is kind of unique in a lot of ways. So I'd like to kind of focus on some of the situations that we're aware of here and how we can take care of them.
Daniel, may I start with just an acknowledgement that there is some language in the bylaws, but it's, number one, it's antiquated language, and I understand it's also unenforceable.
A lot of it is, yeah. A lot of it revolves around, the number of people who can live in a unit or rental. Those things we've determined on the board, and through legal advice, we've determined those are just unenforceable. And that's really not the approach. I think the main thing is people don't care if there's a short-term rental next door to them if they don't know it's there, if they don't know what it is. So
The only reason I bring it up is I understand that an HOA can't suddenly start to regulate the rental market. If we did not have any language about rentals,
if we had nothing at all,
we had nothing at all. I understand there's case law, I don't even know if it's in Washington, that says you can't just as an HOA suddenly start to regulate rentals.
I think you can't add a new amendment to your covenants if there's not already an existing amendment about rentals that you can modify. You can't just up and add things saying, hey, we can't have
That's my point, right?
Yeah,
So
but
we do have something in the
Yeah.
covenants that do deal with rentals, even though,
it's intended for long-term rentals.
Yeah,
But it mentions rentals, so that means that rentals were not a prohibited activity in Sun Valley, so that puts some limits on what we can do. But, I mean, I think, you know, maybe the focus is more, how do we enforce the things we already have?
Well, I just wanted to bring it up
Yeah.
because if anyone sees this, I don't want them to think that we're suddenly starting to regulate
Yeah.
short rentals without having any history of that. So
Yeah.
there is a history of some rules, and we just have to figure out what we're going to do.
I don't want to get started on the HOA's regulations because I've read through them and some of them are frankly unconstitutional. But we won't go there right now.
Yeah.
Talking about signs specifically, but, okay,
I'm sorry about signs?
signs,
Okay.
yeah. As far as short-term rentals go, I think our first step ought to be to, number one, acknowledge that the county has regulations, and number two, make a determination that whatever we decide to do as an HOA, we will build on those regulations.
I think that's the right approach. I don't think we're looking at, you know, banning short-term rentals or anything like that.
Right.
We want things that our community can live with and give our neighbors recourse if they have problems.
And so the first thing that I would note is that under the county's regulations in Sudden Valley, short-term rentals require a conditional use permit. And that conditional use permit requires a public hearing. And in the zone that we are in, public hearing cannot be held by the hearing examiner unless every property owner within 1,000 feet of the proposed use is notified. And my first suggestion would be is that the HOA send a request to the county that says that anytime someone submits an application for a short-term rental, or they call them vacation rentals, in Sudden Valley, that the HOA be notified.
Yeah, that was one topic I did want to discuss as far as registering all the short-term rentals, so that I have no idea how many there are. I don't know if anybody does.
I looked today because we have used them before. We have a small home. I have kids that have come to stay with us, and a couple times they rented an Airbnb in the area. Interestingly, today, they're almost all not showing in either Airbnb or VRBO. At least in our area, I know for a fact that there are a half a dozen homes that are typically active rentals. And as of 1 o'clock today, there's only one.
I know there's at least 3 in my neighborhood.
And is that because they're rented and so they're not
Dates may be
available?
Okay. I searched for a couple dates. I searched for a week in June, and then I went to November just to see, and I didn't find anything. So
And I know I know of 2 in my neighborhood. I'm sure there are more, but I do know of 2.
you live right up above me. You're Debbie's husband, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, you just live,
I'm a lucky guy.
you live about 200 feet away.
Yeah. Yeah, so again, that's where I think we should start. Another thing we might want to do if we're trying to figure out where they are is to look at property ownership records. Because as you indicate, as of a certain date, and I think it's about 3 years ago, the county updated its regulations, and anything before that is grandfathered in.
So does the county, I heard that the county was in the process of updating their regulations, or maybe that's been done already, or maybe that's just bad information. What do you know about that?
Well, I know that the county is in the process of updating its comprehensive plan,
Right?
and
But not specifically their short-term
Well,
rental.
again,
It's probably part of it.
where I'm working, we're in the process also of updating our comprehensive plan, and in the process of doing that, we're also looking at all of our development regulations to see what we need to do to make the development regulations consistent with the comprehensive plan. And another item that I will note is that under the Growth Management Act, which is a state law, any rules or regulations that we as an HOA put in place have to comply with the county's comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I'm not anticipating that we would get that deep into the sort of regulations. I'm thinking more of compliance kind of things and, you know,
Yep.
how many parking spaces and things like that, not, again, like how many people can stay there. So I think the things that the county already has in place, I think will probably be like a baseline for us. That's how I'm envisioning it. Does that sound like a workable
That
plan?
makes perfect sense.
So what do we do about a house that has 16 guests?
Well, I think we were starting to touch on it. Registering all of these properties will really get to will help us with compliance, because at this point, you can't just go to the people that are staying at this short-term rental and complain to them. They don't care. There's no way you can get a hold of the owner. At this point, we don't have those records. And
Daniel,
yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did want to say, don't we have the ownership information for each of the homes? So if there is a home, for instance, with 16 vehicles in it, doesn't the HOA have the ability to contact the owner?
they do, yes. Yeah, we don't have a comprehensive list of short-term rentals,
Right.
which is our focus here. And we're not trying to put any other burden on them other than, what everybody else has. But at this point, it would be helpful to have short-term rentals registered. I mean, as far as you know, you're not registered as a short-term rental with Sudden Valley, is that correct?
But no, I don't know of any process to do that. I mean, we're in the directory and we've given all of our contact information to the HOA. So,
Yeah, I don't think there's any mechanism for you to do that. And I think that may be one of the things that we really need to focus on and see how we can get people to voluntarily comply with that. I mean, that seems like step one for us.
If I may, I think one of the ways to do that is that if we know of a house in our neighborhood that is being used as a short-term rental, provide that information to the HOA and let them research the ownership record so that we have that documentation, and then we contact the owner.
Yeah, I think initially voluntary registration would be great.
Yep.
It's not always going to work 100%. And I know for a fact that if somebody's living next to a short-term rental and they have problems with them, they will have no problem calling Alan and putting their name on the list.
And that's how we learn.
Yeah.
Anthony, I thank you for speaking up. Even though you're not here, don't hesitate to just jump in.
Yeah, please.
You're-
no problem.
And again, we're not ganging up on short-term rentals at all. We just want
and
this
I
all to
wanna-
work.
I want to talk about my experience. We have had no problems with the short-term rentals. It's pretty busy in the summertime, but my experience is the people are extremely polite. We've never had anyone being, crazy noisy. That's not the issue. But what happens is you get a group of 12 or 14 or 16 people sitting on the deck in the evening, even though they're talking quietly. Someone tells a joke, and pretty soon the volume just tends to go up. And so I don't want anyone to think that, at least my experience with short-term rental clients
And
has been,
somebody brings out an accordion and
it hasn't even been like that. It just hasn't.
We're definitely have a no accordions rule in.
But I think that's a problem. I think we have noise regulations in Sudden Valley, whether they're short-term rental people or they're your actual neighbors hooping and hollering on their their deck at midnight, playing guitars and loud music. No,
Well, I
care who
think,
they
I
are.
think,
so.
I think educating the people who own these properties is going to be a big part of this, because you probably have a really good owner there that tells the renters that, no, you can't get away, we don't.
Again, it's not just one. From where I see, there are half a dozen, down
Yep.
on the park. They're just a lot.
Yeah.
I have a next door neighbor who's a musician, and they have rehearsals at his house all the time. I love it.
So I think what might be relevant is to just brainstorm a pretty comprehensive list of all the ways in which short-term rentals disrupt the community. And then we can, line by line, go ahead and brainstorm what is a proper recourse or way to mitigate some of those issues as a community.
Daniel, may I ask for our new visitor to acknowledge herself, just so we can.
Lori Robinson.
Hi, Lori.
My co-chair.
Oh, okay.
I think Ariel has a good idea there, and I was going to ask Daniel if you know this. Is there any data that has been collected on complaints that we could look at. We've kind of asked about this as this process has unfolded because we were trying to figure out, is this, one or two problem owners? Is this more comprehensive? We were just trying to figure it out because, frankly, we've done this for, over 2 years now, and I don't think we've had a complaint yet, but, we may be the exception. So we're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I don't think we have any data like that, any formal data, but we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, and we do want to sort of quantify this so that we can analyze it and determine what the problem areas are. And I think, again, registering these properties, because we might be getting complaints from people who are just, the homeowners, being jerks. It's not just short-term rental people at all.
No.
So once we do get all these people registered, we'll find out what the problem is specifically for short-term rentals and talk about those problems.
One of the things that I would suggest is as we get to the point where we're requiring people to register their short-term rentals, one of the pieces of information I think is critical is that they provide us with contact information for someone who's available 24/7 in case there's an issue that needs to be resolved.
In many places, that person has to be local.
That's what I was just going to say, within an hour.
I think you're, definitely on the right track, getting into the nitty-gritty with the compliance issues that are at the heart of a lot of the complaints. And I think we have to keep in mind, what is our goal here? What is our goal? What is the problem we're trying to solve?
From where I
What
stand,
is it, really?
feels like, how there are people that are pro short-term rentals and there are people that are anti short-term rentals for whatever reasons. And so it feels like what our job is to listen first and foremost, to understand what are these people saying over here and what are these people saying over here, and how can we come to kind of a common understanding and create the set of regulations that feels safe first and foremost, that feels comfortable, that feels reasonable, that feels in compliance with the county. Feels like that's kind of where we can start. And I already started a little list of some of the more obvious things that people may complain about, including noise, including parking issues, including like this revolving door feel where it just feels transient. It doesn't feel like a community anymore. The impact potentially on long-term housing, people that want to live here more permanently but can't because houses are occupied by short-term rentals. And this, transience feel, and you were mentioning also this like parking, and it just, you want to go over to the neighbor to get a cup of sugar, but it's not your neighbor, it's this stranger. So,
And that's exactly the process we went through in La Corner. Getting the community involved, getting the neighborhoods involved, so that they all had a voice in what the outcome was.
May I make just a big picture comment here? I don't want to, for me, I don't want us just to focus on noise complaints, garbage and traffic and all that. I, like many people, am concerned about the cost of living everywhere, right? Bellingham, years ago, 40 years ago, you couldn't give away a house in Southern Valley. There were homes that sat empty, waterfront homes. Nobody wanted them because there was just not enough economic activity around here. It's changed, of course. And one of my concerns is that many of the homes around me are owned by property owners who've been here for 30 or 40 years, and they're getting up in age. And they're not going to be around forever. And what I see happening, and I've got two examples right in my neighborhood where a homeowner dies. He was a Tom in particular, and I probably shouldn't be specific, but I guess I wanted, even whoever hears this, I wanted to be honest about the story. He was a neighbor, came over and visited, and he was the guy you could go borrow a cup of sugar from, right? He passed away a couple years ago, and that home now never went on the market for sale. The only use now is a short-term rental. The family doesn't stay there. And I can see that based on where we are, it's a cool place right close to the water. Existing families are not going to want to give up the property because it's extremely valuable as an Airbnb. And it creates problems for people like you, Ariel, who want to move into the area. because the cost of the home now is really not based on the local economy. It's based on how much money it can generate. So it's become a business. And I really fear that, at least in my neighborhood, there will be no turnover because the families who have the property make a lot of money. And I don't know if that's really the right thing for Sudden Valley. That's one of the questions. Do we want to become a, like a recreation area full of short-term renters and transients, or do we want to have?
That's sort of where I was heading before when I started my comment, was that do short
Uh-oh, I lost the audio.
Anthony?
We didn't hear.
Oh, there you go. Jane, yeah, Jane started her comment and then she cut off for some reason.
And I'm not saying this because I want to get rid of short-term rentals. That's not at all what my point. But my point is, what benefit is there to us as a community, to have short-term rentals? The occasional family comes into town, has a place to stay. There are some people who can only afford a house here if they're also able to rent out a room. There are some people who plan to move here eventually, and they want a house now, although they could just buy that house when they moved here. And then with that overarching thing is, how does this improve us at all? If we can say, there aren't really that many ways that short-term rentals improve us as a community. So how do we mitigate the harms? I mean, I feel like that's what we're aiming for here. And the harms become greater the more we have of them. And I totally agree with you, Mark, that there will be more. I mean, it's just the way the world is going now.
I think one of the things we can look at, and I'm not 100% sure on this legally, but minimizing the number of homes an owner can have as a short-term rental.
Okay.
And so
What about
so
minimizing?
corporations don't.
Can you minimize by a percentage of homes also in the?
I know that's a great idea, that if I wanted to, I could set up an LLC.
That's true, you could have
I
15 LLCs.
buy your home, and
Yeah, that's-
you would never know.
Whatever we come up with here, obviously, we're going to take to legal.
Yeah.
Discuss what we can't, we're going to probably have these pie-in-the-sky ideas, what we would like to do, but, legal's going to, and we did talk to legal a year or so ago about where we stand and what we can and can't do, just at a very high level. So we have some idea about what some of the limitations are.
Daniel, if I may, I think that what makes sense in my mind, rather than focusing on how to enforce regulations and tighten things up before we fully understand what the goal is of the tightening, I think it might make sense to kind of reverse engineer it from the needs. We have a need to feel safe in our community. We have a need to feel it's quiet and noise complaints aren't arising. We have a need to feel like cohesion, and we have a need to feel that there's not going to be parking and congestion in the streets and things like that. And so how can we reverse engineer from those needs? And also we have a need for homeowners to potentially feel like they can create and generate income using their property, as long as it stays in compliance with what the community agrees is reasonable. So I think from those needs, can we now reverse engineer what the regulations are, rather than going from here, having these tight regulations first, and then feeling like, well, maybe not all of our needs are being met.
I disagree, because I think we've already talked about, I think we're all pretty well aware, maybe we need to put them down on paper, but I think we're pretty well aware of what we want our community to be, and we've talked about noise, and we've talked about garbage, but I think it's good to be able to talk about the other end of it as well, is how can we put in, I guess what I'm saying is, I feel like we need to write them down, but I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that, because we pretty much all know what we want Sudden Valley to be. But we do need to talk about how can we limit the number of them. And the other thing we haven't mentioned, and I want to know from somebody else, we're a watershed. What rights does that give us? What kind of limitations can we put out? Because we're a watershed, we have certain responsibilities for that. And so that needs to be
No, finish.
That needs to be an element of what we're talking about, and I think with what Whatcom County is doing, they also talk about us being a watershed. And if you have, the more people, the more wastewater, the more people, the more garbage, the more people, the pollution, the more motorcycles, the more, you know, all-terrain vehicles. So that, I think it's not really the reason most of us moved here.
Right.
So,
I-
yeah.
I would-
This is,
Anthony, let's let Laurie talk for a minute.
and shut me down if this was already discussed, because my apologies, I was late. It's all great that we want to figure out what we want for our community and all that other stuff. And we might want for our community to only have, women with short blonde hair live here, but we can't do that. So we have to work within the constraints of the law. So I think we need a clear definition of what can we and can we not do. Like some of my greatest concerns, and to my knowledge, I don't have any short-term rentals around me, so I haven't been affected by anything. But my concern are these, because I did talk to a few insurance agencies, and when you have a short-term rental, it is considered a business, and you may need different homeowners insurance. Your regular homeowners insurance is not going to cover you. And my concern is to say you have a short-term renter in there, they come, they bring their dog gets out, it bites a child on Sudden Valley property. We now have liability.
Yeah, these are the little details that, I mean, we've got some big picture ideas too, but we need to consider a lot of these little things that maybe, you brought that up, maybe you bring something else up.
And so, I
We
mean,
need to dig into these details, and we've got time over the coming weeks.
right, like
We need to acknowledge.
can we legally, at this point in time, until things progress with the county, can we legally even say, no, you can't have a short-term rental?
Yeah, we believe we can.
I don't either.
I don't think any of us are saying that we
Right.
go that direction.
So,
I think, for example, that when the county holds a public hearing, one of us ought to be there and listen to what's being said and comment on the impact that could have on that specific neighborhood. And I wanted to mention, there's another aspect of short-term rentals that we ought to be aware of, and that is, and my wife and I have talked about this too, what if we want to go on vacation for a month and just rent the house while we're gone?
Yeah. That, I mean, at this point, you have no one to talk to get an answer for that. And
Yeah.
that's
Right.
part of what our ask is here.
I would,
Want to touch, I'll get to you in a second, Anthony. I just want to, one other thing out when Barbara was talking about the impact. One of the things that we should probably discuss is a registration fee for the short-term rentals, because there is an impact on our community as far as, use of roads and other amenities and things like that. So all the impact, we may need to, if we consider a fee for these registration, is to determine what the impact is and put a monetary value on that, maybe an annual fee or whatever it is. And I think as long as it's reasonable, that is something that we can do legally. And I think that's a sensible thing to do too.
For sure.
I was just wanting to comment, circling back on the, the issues that we need to address. I mean, I think the majority of the issues that we've heard have been noise and parking issues. Does the HOA, do they issue fines for that? Have they done that in the last few years? I'm just trying to also understand the scope of the problem before we figure out what the solutions could be.
I think they've done that to a limited extent, parking on the street and things like that. I don't think that's a big priority, but I think that maybe something that we come up with our task force, maybe something that can be extrapolated across the board, because I don't think we're trying to single out short-term rental properties, but I think these may be sensible things for the whole community, make us all happier to live here.
Right. And then I was going to address one other point that Lori made, and this could be the business license requirement, but I know there is a Washington requirement that you have $1 million worth of liability coverage if you're going to run an STR. And I know we've complied with that, but as I'm sitting here right now, I can't put my finger on where that requirement is. So that should be covered if the STR owner is in compliance.
And that's one thing that with registration, that's a vital part of that, is that we can see that they have already met whatever legal restrictions the county puts in place, and that they have.
Yeah, I believe they need to have a UBI number with the state of Washington.
Is that, when they get their UBI though, is that when they would have to prove that they have insurance?
Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, I
And
don't know.
I believe the business license is only required if you're operating it as an LLC. If you're just an individual operating as a sole proprietor, I'm not sure that's required, but you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
It is required, I think, the last I checked.
I'm an
Okay.
independent consultant, and
Yeah.
I have to have a business license.
I also do.
I would like some clarity from Daniel and Lori, because I'm not really clear what the goal is here. Clearly, there are some voices that are talking about installing or developing some kind of restriction, some kind. Then I also hear, well, we can't do any restrictions, so what we're going to do is we're just going to mitigate. We're going to put fees on and just make sure whatever happens covers Sudden Valley financially and follows the law. So I guess my question is, are we here to discuss just how to mitigate the problems from short-term rentals, or are we considering at all any kind of restrictions? Restrictions in either how many Airbnbs can be in a neighborhood, how many people can live in an Airbnb. If we're not, then this becomes really just an administrative.
Yeah, I think all of that is on the table. What Lori and I are tasked with is presenting to the board in 90 days from today, recommendations on how to live with short-term rentals. We're not going to have a policy book or anything like that, but we'll present to the board some ideas.
At this point, my interest is, number one, to somehow install some restrictions, however major and minor, because right now I just see us turning into some other communities around the country that have just either haven't managed any short-term rentals and the whole neighborhood has changed. So that's my goal, is to somehow manage this, not just make sure that the valley has enough money to handle all the complaints and
Right.
handle all the garbage. That's important also, but
Well, I mean, if we're talking about just your personal consideration on this topic, if you had 20 short-term rentals, or you're all your neighbors, but you didn't know they were because they were all abiding by the rules, I've had bad neighbors too.
right.
So as long as you don't know,
But you would know, because if there's different people coming and going from the house all the time.
but if,
it's-
yeah, I mean,
I shared with you a little bit that does really change the community feel.
Right.
The Ariel's point.
I agree. I agree.
So, and I understand that homeowners have rights. You know, we're not going to be able to just say no short-term rentals. So
Right.
One thing we have to be careful of is, and the Supreme Court has said that you cannot regulate the form of ownership.
Right.
Yeah. And they were dealing with apartments versus condominiums at the time.
can you clarify?
What do you mean by that? Form of ownership?
Right, so if somebody
with your
decides they
property,
want
right?
to take their apartment complex and turn it into a condominium complex, you can't regulate that. Or if they want to take condos and sell them separately as apartments, you can't regulate that. And to me, it seems like it'd be a fairly short step for someone to argue, well, if I own this house, I should be able to rent it. And the form of rental should not be regulated. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but
I think there are examples, even Bellingham, the city of Bellingham has some pretty specific rules on short-term rentals. I believe they're restricted to certain areas of the city.
Right, like you can rent in Barclay Village, but you can't in the lettered streets.
And you can't have one at all in the watershed.
Right.
Have an STR in the watershed in the city of Bellingham at all.
Right, which is why
In
can
the
we,
county, right.
why can we have them here? We're watershed. So there should be something that we can, there should be something we can stand on, or at least limitations.
The county says that you can have short-term rentals or what they call vacation rentals in the watershed.
Do they limit how many? Do they say the volume?
But, and that's another thing. I mean, if we go to a public hearing and we get up and say, there's already 5 other short-term rentals within 500 feet of this property, so another one is going to create much more havoc than we normally would in a regular neighborhood, that's something that the hearing examiner would consider.
I do think we ought to recognize the distinction, though, too, between the HOA and a governmental entity, because governmental entities can place those types of restrictions on there. I mean, a governmental entity can perform a taking and just take your property from you and compensate you for it. There is a distinction there, and I do think there, there are some things that we need to look at before we would try and regulate numbers and things like that.
I can tell you from personal experience that takings can get very messy.
Yeah.
Takings can get very messy.
Yeah.
I was kind of on the outside of one when I was working in Maine that was a little crazy.
Okay, so I think that, I mean, we could talk in circles all day. I think that in order for us to kind of move forward with the goal of creating, as you said, one more time your name?
Mark?
Mark, as Mark said, kind of a reactive as well as a proactive approach here, where there's recourse when the guidelines don't get followed, but also there's a framework inside of which things operate, and if they're not operating inside that framework, now there's recourse. So proactive, reactive, and so I think too, I think it does involve looking at what the needs are, what all the broad spectrum of all the needs are, and now, again, I'll, at the risk of repeating myself, reverse engineer from these needs, okay? So rather than saying there just need to be fewer short-term rentals, well, why do there need to be fewer short-term rentals? What's the problem with the short-term rentals? And therein is the framework that we can start to create, because it's not that the goal is not to have fewer short-term rentals. The goal is to address why we want to have fewer short-term rentals in the first place. And so I think that's kind of the starting place. And then there we can flesh it out.
And I think that the starting point that you indicated originally was, let's start by having a registration process. Let's have a registration fee. Let's require proof of ownership, proof of insurance, all of that, and go right down the line and say, what do we need to make sure that we can regulate this in a reasonable manner?
And I think if you look at I didn't see what Michael sent you from Suncadia,
Oh, okay.
but I did go to the Suncadia website and I looked at some of their forms, and, it's not necessarily that we need to reinvent the wheel either, because a lot of these, they already
Exactly,
have
yeah.
documents that address all these issues within the scope of what an HOA can do. It doesn't address the larger issues of loss of community, of course, because that's not what their forms are about, but it is kind of nice to be able to take something that already exists and tweak it to fit our homeowners association, instead of developing the same thing and then arguing over the wording and, all that again. So.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about specific Sudden Valley problems and our own experiences with it, so we can take, what are, I mean, these regulations are all over the world. I mean,
Yeah.
have problems with this, and they regulate them in certain ways. But I think I want to make sure that we don't overlook anything like the insurance thing. I mean, that could easily have been overlooked. And, we need to put down all these little details down so we can address them, or have a little subsection in our policy book to address these, because like you said, there's no place at this point to look any of this stuff up. So I think definitely we do need to build on stuff that's already been, I mean, maybe even stuff you've done for LaConner. I mean, build on that. It's probably a boilerplate kind of policy that you're working on there, and then just what we do in Sudden Valley would just be on top of that.
But that's a city though, right? You're talking about LaConner, the city.
Yeah.
But I mean, similar to our
Yeah,
county.
yeah.
I mean, they're probably fairly similar, but then we can.
Well, yeah, and we had a
those for-
process for doing that that would be different from the process here, obviously, because this is an HOA. But again, I'm going to go back to the county because the county has, I think, 9 different conditions for approval of a conditional use permit. And among those are the activity will be harmonious and in accordance with the general and specific objectives of the county's comprehensive plan, zoning, and other applicable regulations. If located in a rural area, it will be consistent with rural land use policies as designated in the rural lands element, will not be hazardous or disturbing to existing or future neighboring uses. And those are just a few of the examples.
So does the county, I want to just understand restrictions versus, I don't know what the phrase should be, just ways to mitigate the existence. So are there any restrictions there where you can't have an STR under certain conditions? Okay. Or are we, okay, I guess that's what I was asking.
Another one, yeah.
Well, the restrictions are basically,
It sounds to me like as long as you follow the rules, there are no restrictions.
yeah, and an example, for example, if there's a public hearing, and we have noticed at that public hearing in advance, and we can look at the application, and we can make a determination as a group here or as an HOA, whether we think that these conditions are met by the application, we can bring that testimony either verbally or in writing to the hearing examiner for his consideration.
Well, this is good because, again, I'm still trying to figure out where everybody wants to go. My preference would be that at some point, Sudden Valley Community Association has some kind of restrictions, what those are. It doesn't seem like the county has that. The county just has rules. All the rules you can have a short-term rental.
Yeah, I'm thinking, specifically Sudden Valley, like, how many cars can you park in the driveway? Can you park in the front yard? Can you park on the street? Does the
Right.
trash have to be back by the house after a day or two?
Yeah.
I mean, these are little issues, but everybody has had a complaint about all of these, and I want to make sure that we do address these nitpicky things, not the bigger. I mean, these big county regulations are there. I mean, we can't supersede those or.
I have a nitpicky question. There, how come there can be 16 people in a house? How many bedrooms are in that house? Because our regulations are 2 people for Sudden Valley, 2 people to a bedroom plus 2, right? Am I
I
wrong?
think our attorney stated that is actually cannot
do that
be
anymore?
enforced, no.
Okay, I just wondered because.
Wait,
It's still in our bylaws,
no, that's not the 2+2 thing, though. That's the thing that says it has to be a household of
single.
2 adults and blah,
Yeah.
blah, not related, no more than
I
3
don't think,
unrelated.
I don't think we
But-
can restrict who is inside
But I'm
private
pretty
residence.
sure there are restrictions outside of Sudden Valley. I don't know where I read them now, because I swear I read so many
If
different
it, if it was there, it would be, have to do something with the sewer.
things. 2 people per bedroom plus 2 people is the maximum occupancy for a short-term rental.
Tell you from my deck, I could see a house that will sleep 8. There's a house that will sleep 25. It's a family home that's not an Airbnb. Don't have any problem with that one, okay? There's a house across from me that will sleep 12, and I think it's only a 2-bedroom home. They've got bunk beds and,
This often
there's
was
another house
vacation
up the hill
homes.
that I know will sleep 16. That's how they advertise.
Well,
There's another home that was recently built specifically for use as an Airbnb. It was.
wow.
Maybe Anthony. Anthony, do you know the answer to that question when you were making your application about your occupancy max for your house?
So there were no occupancy maximums that we were restricted to. We self-restrict, as I think any good property manager would do, property owner would do. The more people you have in a home, the more you will, more wear you will cause. I think the problem that we have with occupancy and with parking, and I'm not saying this is not, can't be addressed, but is how do you determine what a maximum occupancy is for a house? If you have a 10-bedroom house, then you can probably have 12, 15 people stay there comfortably. If you have a 2-bedroom house, then that's probably, 4 to 6. How do you regulate that and be consistent and fair throughout the community? And then I guess the other thing is will those apply outside of short-term rentals? I mean, are we going to go in and say, homeowner, you have 10 people living in a 2-bedroom house, you can't do that. That's too many people. So, I mean, those are things I just think we need to consider as we're thinking about some of these things.
Yeah, I think the way that I would approach it would be the parking. We have a house on Louisview Drive, and there was a time when I saw 10 cars in the front yard and the driveway, and in the middle of all the cars, there was a tent.
Oh,
So I think there's something with that incident that we can kind of regulate and get around. I don't care how many people are living in the house, as long as they're quiet, but once they start parking in the front yard and on the street, that's the kind of thing that people are complaining about.
Yeah, no complaints from me on that. And certainly, I think we already have. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I own houses and other HOAs, but don't we already have restrictions that prevent cars from being parked on the side of the house, on the front yard, things like that? I mean, aren't you restricted to the driveway?
There are some restrictions, regulations, but I think part of our task here is going to be to educate these owners, to educate the guests that these are regulations and that if they're uh, not upheld, that there will be a good fine, not just for the STR owners, but anybody who's living in these houses.
This goes back to Ariel's point is, maybe we do need to compile the information and put it on our website, somewhere to where people can, comply with these and they have an understanding of what is required.
Yeah, that is the ultimate goal.
you can come over here.
I'm good. I was just going to share, since I've been here, I have some friends staying with me. We've been hanging out for a couple weeks. And I came home one day and there was a car parked directly in front of our home in a spot, that people get contentious about. I've noticed about here. Street parking is allowed by anyone. It's not my spot, but it looks like it would be associated with my home, right? The car came home, there was a car parked there, and then there was a car parked on the street in front of my home. And that is one of those instances. That's not my STR. That's not people that aren't living there, right? That wasn't my neighbors. Those were my neighbors with guests. So how are you going to determine if you do say X number of cars, how are you going to determine if it belongs to the STR or if it belongs to a neighbor? That's just an anecdotal thing that I noticed while I've been here. I was like, well, I'll be.
Me too.
Yeah. I was like, anyway. And my husband and I have talked about that too with the car regulation and thing. Cars come in so many different sizes. You have a giant Suburban, some of these large things they try to give me at the car rental place, right? I'm like, is that a home or is that a vehicle? But then you also have little bitty cars, like I drive a Mini Cooper, right? Is that one car? How many cars fit in a driveway is very subjective, right? So that's another thing, Jess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's why I want to talk about these little things, and we're not going to solve these issues today, but I mean, that's a question we may need to ask ourselves and come up with a number. Are you saying that you have what looks like a parking space in front of your yard, in front of your property? I'm trying to understand what your situation was. So you have what looks like a parking space on the street in front of your yard.
Underneath a tree that's in our yard.
Yeah.
Thing. So, even when I first moved here, I kind of thought, well, that's our parking spot,
Yeah.
right? But then learning just from watching conversations and complaints, these similar complaints, in the different Facebook pages and stuff here that everybody gets mad about people parking on the street around here, and people try to lay claim to spots, right? And so that's not my spot at all.
Yeah, I've seen people put no
But people
parking
would
signs there.
assume that was maybe my car associated with my STR, the STR, right? And
Yeah,
count that as a guest car, but it's not a guest car at all. It's my neighbor's car.
yeah.
Anyway, it was just a thought I had.
Well, parking does come up as a big issue with short-term rentals, and that's part of what we're gonna have to talk about.
Yep.
Condition of approval that the county has is that the project will have vehicular approaches to the property which shall be so designed as to not create an interference with traffic on surrounding public streets.
But I would also like to see people not filling their whole front yard with parking. And then, you know, if you have a party, that's where you're different with the STR and just a regular owner. An owner's not going to have parties every weekend where they have 10 people in the front yard. But if with an STR, this property that I'm talking about, it's consistently fills the
So
front yard.
it would not be unreasonable for us to add a condition of our own that says that the applicant shall not have parking unless it's on the property.
Yeah. And I mean, when they do when they register the property, maybe they would have to tell us how many bedrooms and one car per bedroom or whatever number we come up with. Maybe that's a way to get into it.
And an easy way, like registration is great, all that, but something that we can fall back on is things that we know are already there. Like I'm just looking at one of the RCWs as it pertains to short-term rentals and what must be in there. And we can request that this is posted, like they're supposed to post, you know, all this information, including floor plan, including fire exits and escape routes and the installation of carbon monoxide alarms. We can, and what is our recourse if they don't? Well, then it's up to, since we're a county, it's up to the county to issue a violation at that point.
So it would be helpful to have a package of things that we're asking for when they register. Like a floor plan.
I would, yeah, and I don't think that the asking for that is an issue. If the HOA starts to try and it become the enforcement arm of the county, that I see potential liability for the HOA there, you know, if we get it wrong or if we're
Exactly.
overzealous.
If we're requiring certain items because it's a state or county regulation and they're in violation of that, then the violation, you know, I mean, like the written violation should come from the authorities, not us.
Yeah.
We could issue fines to the homeowners for parking in the street, blocking driveways and all of that, but we have to have a framework where we know what are the requirements. Just as anybody, if they were to open business here, if you were to, you know, run a fitness center, a fitness business, and you were teaching yoga, the association is going to require all this information. You want to have your RV in Area Z or a boat in one of the boat slips, you have to turn over all this documentation. I don't know why, if we're having somebody operate a business in Sudden Valley, why we are not requiring, at least in the minimum, the legal documents required to operate a business in this county.
And I don't think Sudden Valley can now or ever will be able to enforce all of these things that the county requires and even the things that will require. But if there are complaints, we need recourse. And I think that's the big part of what we're concerned with here.
May I share an anecdotal story about parking?
I did. You do.
Because this will happen weekly until we resolve this. The park I live on has maybe 10 parking spots that are designated for guests. And Valley guests come, people come from Bellingham, people come from Vancouver, because there's not many places you can get onto Lake Whatcom. So those parking spots in the summer are really prime parking spots. Well, when we have a busy weekend, where we have Airbnbs all over the place, guess where they park? They park in those public parking spots that are supposed to be there for people that visit the park.
Talking about at Sofield?
Sofield.
Yeah, there's like six.
And they changed it. They took out some
Okay.
small trees there. I think there are 10 or 12.
Okay.
So what happens on a sunny Saturday and Sunday is those park spots are full of Airbnb guests. And then other people come. So where do they park? They park on the side, and pretty soon you can't get a fire truck through there. So this happened. I walked out there and I said, this is ridiculous. It was a busy day. So we called security. Security came down. He tried to move people. People moved. An hour later, more people came from Bellingham. It was a mess, and I felt sorry for the security guard because what could he do? We can't park here, so people would move. But it's a huge problem because if we ever had a fire on Inlet Circle,
Oh, don't get me going on fires.
you can't get through there. So that's an anecdotal story about how there needs, one of the things we need to talk about is,
Ask me later, I'll tell you why that all happened.
I think one thing we have to think about with whatever regulations we are going to be enforcing here is that we're going to run into a legal issue if we enforce them against STRs and we don't enforce them against our own residents.
yeah.
And I think could be a big problem. I mean, I don't know if this is true, maybe you might know, but I think it's even a problem for HOAs that start to enforce CCR bits that they haven't been enforcing in the past, and they suddenly decide to start doing it.
You're correct, that is a problem.
Yeah, so that is there more enforcement happening now with the compliance officer?
Yes,
I think so,
definitely.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, I spoke with Alan, our compliance officer, about our group, and they will be able to support us. You know, he'll probably come to maybe in the next meeting. I was hoping he'd be here for this one, but he's definitely going to be part of this and a big part of this once we do present something to the board. But you know, without compliance, all of this means nothing. So we do have the backing of the general manager too, and obviously the board who gave us this task force. So things, you know, we want things to be nice for everybody. That's ultimately what we're trying to do here, and fair, and work within our limits. So I'm trying to think how we can go forward. I mean, we've got some issues, specific issues. Parking seems to be a huge one that always comes up when we talk about short-term rentals. So
But,
at
but,
some
but
point,
that,
we're gonna have to come
but
up with
that's all, I mean, like parking and all of this stuff, those are our HOA rules that every person, whether you're a short-term rental, a long-term rental, or you're a homeowner, that has to be enforced. So that's a completely, I mean, shouldn't be, you know, we can make sure, one of our requirements could be is that within a short-term rental or within a short-term rental contract, however you want to look at it, that those have to be highlighted or pointed out. And that acknowledge that if a renter violates those, that the fine is going to go back onto the owner. But we don't need any different rules. We just need to make sure that our rules in general are enforced.
Yeah, I mean, we have to make sure that the rules that we have for everybody
Mm-hmm.
are proper in light of what the problems that we see most prevalently in short-term rentals. Because that's where you almost always see it, not exclusively, but I mean, they put a light on it and determine whether we need to review our policy for everyone.
We used to get speeding tickets were issued here. You had to have a Sudden Valley card, even children, and the security could stop you at any given time and ask to see that. And if you didn't have that, you know, you weren't allowed to be in, that was before we were more public. So I think now that we have a compliance manager, we're probably going to see some of these problems that we are seeing with short-term rentals and residents go down. And in fact, I think when we come out with our recommendations of this is what has to happen with short-term rentals, it might even, you know, spur some homeowners who are committing some violations to say, hey, look, this is what I'm not supposed to be doing. So I think that that's naturally going to become a course of enforcement now with Alan on there. With short-term rentals in general, I think just knowing where they're at, because our problem is if something happens if you don't know who to contact with that house. I mean, just take this, you know, just say that we had nobody in, you know, there was no rental in that house, and a bomb cyclone hit and a tree fell on the house, and that owner lives somewhere way else. You know, if that house was registered, we would know how to contact the property manager. You know, I think it's really just if you don't have someone living here.
Yeah.
that
I
you
think
know-
what you just
Don't we have that information though? I mean, that was my point earlier, don't we have the ownership information for everyone? Because even if I don't have my house as a short-term rental and a bomb cyclone has a tree fall on my house, yes, please contact me.
Would it make sense to add a condition that says that a renter has to register with the HOA during the term of his rental?
And that's currently what we have for, in our clause, in our bylaws, just for rentals. Our rentals do not specify long-term versus short-term. Long-term rental is defined by the RCWs as any rental over 30 days. That would be an administrative nightmare.
Might also be considered unreasonable.
Yeah, it would be,
Would it be a worse nightmare than having a tree fall on a house and nobody to contact?
no, that's a nightmare too. But I mean, we don't want to have to set aside a slush fund for attorney fees to handle when people start filing lawsuits against us because we're treating them as an owner unfair because they have chosen to rent their house out. So every homeowner has a right to rent their house out as it stands per now, per our laws. Okay? If those laws are changed, then we would change to amend to follow the laws. But we can register. We can require as part of our homeowner association them to register, just as we do with longer term rentals. We need to, you know, we require the name of the occupant because that's not feasible to do with short-term rentals, where if they're changing, you could have 30 renters in there. And they could come in after hours, and it is, most of them use a platform like VRBO or Airbnb or something like that. And the person is registered there, they know who's renting it. But I think we need to have a way to make sure that the problem is the owners. And are we having a problem with short-term rental owners? Probably the majority of them, we are not. A responsible, this is just my personal feeling, a responsible homeowner who's a responsible, we'll call him landlord of a short-term rental, is going to bring in some responsible renters and is going to make sure that, you know, what happens, that they have sufficient deposits, they withhold deposits if there's any damage, things like that, and is going to have a property manager. Our biggest problem is, I'm just speculating here, is those that rent on their own or are not in touch with what's happening with their rental, who's not communicating with the property manager, like, hey, did we have problems? So if we know who the owners are, and then we can, if this particular property is then having documented issues and their property manager is not properly handling it, then we have something to say, you know, this, and the fines would go up each time. And at some point in time, if they don't control who's in there, it's not going to be a business for them. It's going to be a write-off. It's going to be a loss. And they're eventually going to stop renting that house out. So setting up first, making sure, I mean, I have a huge concern that we have people in here who are renting their house that aren't carrying the $1 million liability policy, that aren't paying their taxes, who are not responsible business owners. And when they have a short-term rental, they are a business owner, whether they want to call themselves that or not. So my primary concern would be making sure that we have everybody in here legal. Same as if we had somebody who was running, I don't know, pottery classes out of their garage and selling pottery. They would need to be set up as a business too. So we're not signaling out short-term rental business owners, every business owner in Sudden Valley should properly have their documentations proper. The difference is, if you're living in your house, running a business out of your house, you are there and you are present. The problem with the short-term rentals is you are not there and you are not present. So that's where our different comes in. So I think, I think having registration is a must.
I think you made a key. I think one of the things that is required is if you're the owner and you're not here, you have a property manager. And we mentioned it once before earlier, that somebody 24/7 who is responsible is available. It cannot fall on our security. It has to be, the business owner has their own property manager. And I don't think that's happening in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think a lot of times security will document what the problem is. They can't go in
They
there.
can't do anything.
No,
No.
but that could reinforce a fine or a fee or an incident.
You know,
And I
some
would,
fine, so what? I mean, you find them, so what? There's got to be more. There's got to be more than that. You know, some people don't care. You find them, fine.
That's the only recourse we have in our, per our bylaws. The only thing we can do is to fine them. We can escalate the fines.
After you're fined so many times, you're out?
No, but we could say after the third fine, your new fine is $25,000.
Oh, okay.
And we could do that. I mean, well, the board could pass. I'm not saying but I'm saying the fines could be set by the homeowner association, but you can't kick them out.
4 years ago. I'm still waiting for security to show up.
Anthony, did you have a point?
oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, I think, certainly with my house there, if there's an issue, I want someone to contact me 24/7. Let me know so that I can try to address it. I think that's a legitimate problem. I mean, that's a legitimate issue. And, if it is something security can handle, great. If it's something illegal, then yes, let's get the sheriff out there. I mean, I want that taken care of.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's why I'm happy that you're with us here, because I would think that whatever we come up with, whatever recommendations we have to present to the board are things that you would probably want us to do, just so this is regulated some way, so you don't have any problems with your guests, and that all the other STRs do the same thing that you're doing. So I think it's all, we want it to be fair. We want you, who sound like a reasonable owner, to be happy with what we come up with and what we present. So your opinion is invaluable, and I think you've had experiences that we haven't had, which will inform our decisions too.
Hey, Daniel, you had I forget what it was. Was it a Microsoft website or a Teams or something? Didn't you set up a group site or something?
I set up a group for email.
No, I thought I got an invitation to some kind of
Yeah, you did. It was
online,
Microsoft Teams, yeah.
yeah, was it a Teams site or something? I mean, it would be nice if we had a place where we could send documents that everyone could see, so that I could be like, hey, look at this, here's this great setup that Suncadia has. Is that like, and then we can look at that. Or, if somebody says, hey, Michael's like, hey, I found these county regulations that apply to us, and everybody might want to look at that.
You're going to force me to become Teams.
No, I don't know anything about Teams either, so it will be,
You could do it on Google Drive.
yeah.
You could create a Google Drive and everyone could drop their documents. So I think it makes sense to create kind of a thoughtful, balanced, short-term rental framework that honors the property owner rights, that supports the community well-being, right, and enhances Sudden Valley as a great place to live and visit. And I feel like if we are confident that as a committee, we understand and have the ability to create an exhaustive list of what the needs of the community are, and I think it makes sense to maybe each individually, once we adjourn, create that list of everything that we can think of based on our own needs, based on the needs of the neighbors that we have, and potentially even the property owners that want to be renting, and then come back at our next meeting with this really big, comprehensive list of things, and then from there, create this framework that makes sense to address all of these needs. But I don't know if we're not confident that we have a comprehensive idea of what what all the needs are, would it make sense to put some type of survey out for the community to add their voice? Because if the ultimate goal is that the community feels safe and thriving and vibrant, do we want to make sure that everyone that wants to have a say can have a say, and everyone that wants to have a say about noise or parking or,
I think that's what the board will decide. You know, our goal, our charge is to just advise the board, in my opinion. That's what I think we're supposed to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I have one, we're almost out of time here, and I have one.
And this was open to everybody.
Yeah.
The community was invited, everybody's welcome to come.
Earl, I didn't mean to shut that down because
Here we
that
are.
maybe has to happen, but I don't think it's up to us to say, well, there needs to be a survey. I have one final thing, because I'm still confused. I asked a question and I maybe got the answer, but I don't know that I did. There are many, many communities around the country that actually restrict short-term rentals. They have all kinds of restrictions. I was under the impression that this discussion could possibly include restrictions. And in looking at the email, the document that I just reread it, it doesn't appear that that's what the board is looking for from us. The board is looking for advice from us on what rules to impose on anyone who wants to have a short-term rental in Sudden Valley. That's what it looks like to me. And I would like, before our next meeting, some clarification from the board. If we as a group decided, now it wouldn't be unanimous, but if we said 4-2 or 5-1 that we wanted to put some restrictions in place, whatever they are, would the board say, well, you can't really restrict it? You legally can't do that.
I think you'd have to talk to legal about that because, the ability to restrict, I think, is dependent on the covenants themselves, and our covenants allow it, and we've allowed rentals, and anyone who has purchased property with the understanding that the bylaws allow rentals, is going to have recourse if all of a sudden that right's taken away from them.
I do understand that. But I just want to acknowledge that there are communities in this country that do restrict short-term rentals.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Washington is different. I get your point, though. I mean, it can change the whole environment of a community like Sudden Valley if half of them are short-term rentals. Is there something that we can do other than just restricting any more short-term rentals? Is there something we could do to make it maybe a little bit more onerous, or maybe the restrictions would have to be followed so that it's not as profitable? I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there, but I can understand your point. You don't want to live in a neighborhood that's just short-term rentals.
That is where I think my neighborhood is headed. I am sure of it. And if I would like some direction from the board, if we are simply here to establish some rules, if you do this and this and this and this and this and this, and this, however onerous or easy they are, you can have a short-term rental. Is that what we're trying to do, or are we even considering putting some kind of restrictions?
I think that could be something we present to the board. If that's something that we think is a valuable thing to investigate, I think we could put that forward to the board. I don't think we could, as a group here, make that determination, but if that's important to us.
But I'd like to find out, because the board might say, and I kind of got that from Lori a little bit, the board might say, we can't restrict them at all.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, our governing documents do not allow us to restrict them. If we wanted to put forth something on, say, the November ballot for the community to vote on, if we're within our legal rights to restrict, we could put something on the ballot and asking the community if they wanted to restrict. But it's not a decision of the.
We can only modify
Yeah.
what's there.
Yeah, the board could not unilaterally just vote on that and make it happen.
But if this group did come up with some restrictions, and I really need some clarity from the board, would the board even consider that? Because it would turn into a legal battle, and the board might just say, we don't want to fight a legal battle.
Well, I think our board is willing to look at and consider anything.
And when you put in new restrictions, it doesn't necessarily backtrack, it's just we draw a line in the sand. And going forward, these are, it doesn't affect people who already have they can't go, oh my God, you're taking overweight. No, we're not talking about you, we're talking about going forward, because that's what we want to do, is not have this community turn into a short-term rental community.
Like existing short-term rentals would have to be grandfathered in.
They'd have to be grandfathered in,
Yeah.
right?
And I don't even know if
I may
that's,
suggest we may get a more positive reaction if we use the word condition instead of restriction.
Well, yeah, we'll get into all the wording when we offer something to the board. No, I think that's a really good point, and I think if we do want to have the board consider that, legal may have some suggestions for how we can do that without, burdening the owners that we have already. There may be some suggestions we would never come up with.
How do we know, as of today, May 28th, how many short-term rentals there are available? Because if we're talking about starting to grandfather people in, if this process takes a year, or
Right,
two, which it
right.
could, there will be a whole lot of other people who are going to turn into short-term rentals, and then, what we thought.
That's why we're having meetings every Wednesday instead of just
Yeah.
2 Wednesdays a month.
Oh, are we every Wednesday?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is this too early for
I
you,
didn't get
Barbara?
that notice.
Because
Am I on the?
is 5 o'clock too early for you? Because you're working.
It's a little early, but I don't want, obviously, it's not too early for anybody else.
I'm retired.
So I'll just make it work. It's not like I have to drive a long way to get here.
I'm flexible.
Is 5:30 better for people?
It doesn't matter to me, I just didn't know if people that were working would find it onerous to come in.
Anthony, 5:30?
That's fine with me as well. I was going to say, I saw that there was a new Zoom link that was sent out, but it looks like it was set for every day, not every week. So,
Oh, no.
Because I knew it was a mistake.
Yeah, I hope it.
For some
you,
reason, I'm
Anthony. I
not getting, I'm
I
not
didn't get
getting,
a Zoom
I'm
link
not
either 'cause I
getting
looked for it.
some of the notices.
The Zoom notices or?
I didn't get a Zoom notice. I don't,
Okay.
I didn't.
because I didn't know it was every week or every day. I had no idea.
So I have a question for two of our group members here, Ariel and Anthony. Because Anthony, you are actively involved in a short-term rental, and Ariel, you're either doing it or considering doing it. Are you, both of you, completely against any restrictions at all?
No, absolutely not.
I mean,
Conditions.
when I say restrictions, I mean, if someone says, I want to put a short-term rental in this house, do we ever want to say, no, you cannot, because there are already too many in that neighborhood?
I think it goes back to addressing the needs, right? And so if people are feeling that the community feel is being lost, how do we address that need? Rather than just having rules and regulations for the sake of rules and regulation.
I don't think we're putting in rules and regulations just for the sake of it.
Right.
I can tell you, in my
Understood.
neighborhood, I could
So-
easily name a bunch of people who would say we have to limit these. So if we did that, would you be okay if there were some limitations that the neighborhood or the association imposed?
I think it makes sense to prioritize the feel of Sudden Valley as a home for so many people. And I think if we're looking at if we're trying to prioritize that, if that's our goal, to make sure that Sudden Valley remains first and foremost, not a business landscape, but a home. If that's the first protection, then we need to make sure that we're prioritizing that.
Anthony, how do you stand on that? I guess I could have your wife.
Yeah, no, well, I was just going to say, it's certainly something we could talk about and consider. I think we need to talk to the legal department about it, because I think we're going to run into issues anytime you say, that's it, we're cutting off here, no more, you can't do it. But, from my own personal and, would I like to be the only one, have a STR monopoly? There's benefits to that. But no, conceptually, I think we need to solve these problems, because I understand your point that you don't want just to live in what you're feeling is an apartment complex with just people coming in and out, that type of thing. So I guess to answer your question, I don't know how we would do it. I don't think I'm opposed to talking about it. But we would have to see how we would go about it.
Can I add too that when I moved here 2 years ago, this is just purely anecdotal here, I actually organized a community potluck dinner at my home. I invited and I knocked on the doors of my neighbors and I said, I'm new here, you know, doing the like cookies and here I'm the new neighbor, because I always dreamed of that, right? It's like always a dream.
Next to me.
They were all cookies too. But no, I wanted to cultivate that community. Everywhere I go, I really do want that. I crave that community connection. We all do. Again, bringing in my background as a holistic health coach, I realize that's a basic, fundamental human need. We need community and we need connection. And so I came here with that very intention. And having hosted this dinner where I think there were 10 to 12 neighbors at this dinner around my table in my living room, and I got feedback from almost everybody around my table that, wow, we've been here for 10, 15, 20 years and no one's ever done anything like this before. And I found that shocking. I said, well, if Sudden Valley really is calling itself this community and wanting to be this place that feels like home, that doesn't feel like a bunch of strangers all around, where is that value in practice? Where are the people that are actually cultivating community?
Welcome to the Northwest. Welcome to the Pacific
And
Northwest,
so,
dear.
and so
It
I
takes a
think,
lot to
yeah,
cultivate friends
right.
that you see
But it all starts with us, right? It
Right.
starts with each individual person that lives here in the valley. If we want it to feel like a community, let's start making it feel like a community, right? And I don't think that it's necessarily a function of, well, if we just restrict short-term or long-term or whatever it is, rentals, now it's gonna feel like a community.
But if we, again, I don't, everyone knows where I stand on this, so I don't need to keep saying it, but I'm telling you, in my neighborhood, we have a pretty close, we get together, drinks on the deck, and the sun comes out.
We have neighborhood gatherings all the time.
That's great.
Yeah, you've seen what our deck looks Sunday. Again, I think that at least around Sophia Park, we are close to a few years from now reaching a tipping point where there will be 80% of the homes there will be short-term.
Yeah.
I would also say that that's not everyone's idea of community. I live on a street where people keep to themselves. It doesn't mean we don't know each other in terms of we know each other's names, we exchange cell phone. Okay, I'm the one that probably spurred the cell phone exchange things more than they did, but there are people who do keep to themselves. A lot of them are single. They're just not social people. I don't know that they would be comfortable coming over to someone's house for dinner that just moved in. But they're still our neighbors, and they're the same people that are there all the time. And we wave at each other, and I, can text them and say, hey, did you know that, the construction guy just drove over all your bushes? I know you're out of town for a month, but just wanted to let you know. So community can mean different things to different people. Yeah, so, and not having short-term rentals all around you can mean loss of community in ways other than the actual, face-to-face stuff like you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I think we brought up a lot of things. I think we asked more questions than we answered, which is good at this point, and what I was hoping for. Um, I think we all agree that a registration of some sort would be key to solving some of these problems. So I'll set up a Google Drive, and we can share notes, and I'll kind of consolidate some of the notes that I took and share them with everybody. But maybe we can consider what a registration would look like and how that would address a lot of the problems that we're talking about today. I think another big point, you're restricting or additional, I think that is something that we could probably articulate and share with the board our concerns. We in legal might have some painless way to help us.
I don't think painless.
Well,
This group go together.
Painless legal.
We'll see, but I think we could articulate something to
I have been
express that.
contacted by some people who would like to join in this conversation, not every week, but people who have background in short-term rental, the establishment of and conditions associated with short-term rentals. They, for whatever reason, aren't on this group. They live in Sudden Valley. I can think two people specifically could provide a boatload of
Well,
experience.
put them in the back of your car and bring them next time.
Okay, I did not invite them to the first meeting, just because we need to get to know each other. But
Yeah.
we're gonna reach a point where we're gonna tell our own stories, and then we're gonna have to do something.
Right.
We're not there yet. It might take several weeks before we actually start to do something.
Well, I think one of our linchpins is the registration. So I want you all to think about what that would look like, and would that solve a lot of these problems, and how would it solve a lot of these problems, and maybe come up with some other things other than the registration.
I'm going to draft a letter that if the board chooses to, they can use. It cites the county's regulations and asks the county from the board to notify them if anyone applies for a conditional use permit for short-term rental.
In an effort for us to understand how many people we have here doing that, is that the point?
Catalog everyone that's going through the Whatcom County permit system. And so that, I guess, that automatically funnels them. Is that what you're saying?
Another interesting facet is that normally this is a 14-day process, but because we're in the watershed, it's a 30-day process. So we'll have extra time
To obtain the conditional use permit, you mean?
Wouldn't all that be public record? That would all be, anyone who's been
It would be
issued,
public record, but
so maybe we could just
when
get,
a hearing is called, every neighbor within 1,000 feet has to be notified. What I want to make sure is that the board is notified as well.
okay, so could we get a list of everyone in Sudden Valley who has been issued a conditional use permit?
So far, I think Anthony's the only person that's gotten a non-conforming use.
You can ask the county for that. I asked the county for information last year, still haven't heard from them.
I will tell you, last year, they were not quite ready for our permit process yet.
Have they started, have started issuing them, Anthony?
So yes, now our process, since we were in existence at the time the ordinance was passed, was a little bit different. But we were issued one earlier this year, and we were the first ones to apply. And it did take way longer than 30 days.
So there are dozens, in theory, dozens of short-term rentals in Sudden Valley, and Anthony is the only one, the only owner that has a conditional use permit. So in theory, every single other short-term rental is out of compliance.
He actually has a non-conforming use permit, from my understanding.
does that mean?
Because it was before the conditional use permit system began.
When did that begin?
Yeah.
It
so
was
it's in it.
August of 2023.
Hey, just one thing about the people that that, are experts. I think in my opinion, it's great to have people come and if they have a specific area of expertise to speak, but I think that we were selected to be on this task force and that the conversation should be, and I don't mean this, the conversation should be limited to us.
I asked,
Yeah,
if they
yeah.
really don't want them to present, I can certainly feed in.
No, present, no. I'm not saying that. I think it's great for somebody to come and give us their expertise, but I think that we need to, this was a pretty freewheeling meeting because this is our first one. But I think after that, it's like the board, you know, I can go to a board meeting, I can speak during the member comment period, but I can't speak during the meeting because that's not my place.
That's why I asked
Yeah,
if it's
yeah.
appropriate for me
Yeah,
to invite them.
I think it's good to be able to defer to somebody who has experience in a question that we may have. But yeah, this is kind of a tight group, but I don't want to exclude anybody in the community from our discussion.
Can we do a members comment time? Or is that not a good thing for?
Because we're not a committee, we have a little bit more leeway in what we can and can't do. So I think if we have somebody that wants to make a comment to us, and it's up to us to, I mean, we can certainly take their comment. I don't know why we wouldn't want to hear from them. And as for experts, if we're talking about a topic, let's say we're talking about conditional use permits, and one of your people is an expert on that, have them come in and present to us so that we have that knowledge in which to form a discussion. I think that's a great idea.
I don't know these people well, but through my group of friends here in the valley, people have heard that I'm on this committee, or what do we call it, a task force? And they say, oh, I have a lot of expertise in that. How can I help? So,
I think, you know, everyone's welcome, and this is a project for the whole community, so we do need the input. And similar to what I did when we were working with the new ACC policies, we had a town meeting and talked about all these things before they actually rolled out. And there were a lot of people that showed up and had a lot of questions, and they were part of the process. And it's more amenable to them when they see that they took part in it.
what was the experience, I think, 2024? I did not attend, I attended one board meeting, and I watched one, I think, online. What was the general experience last year when the discussion of short-term rentals came up? What did people talk about when they attended the meetings? Was it all over the place?
If I remember correctly, there were people who were like, no, we shouldn't have them, no ifs, ands, or buts, we don't care, not gonna be here. And then there was others like, but we're responsible owners, why should we be penalized? And then there wasn't much,
was all over
there wasn't much in the middle. It was like, the people who spoke were here or here. Nobody came and said, I have no problem with short-term rentals, but we should maybe have some regulation and make sure that we're all in compliance. That didn't come out.
And I think the people that spoke and said, we should not have them at all, they didn't have any idea that that wasn't even an option for us to consider, really.
Yeah, and it really has to do with, you know, like, I don't think I have any short-term rentals around me because I pretty much know all the neighbors, but maybe I do, and I just don't know it. In that case, that's a good thing, right? Because there's no issues. And also short-term rentals is not just renting out the whole house, there's also renting out rooms, and there's different regulations with the state on if it's owner occupied and you're renting out rooms. So,
That's a really good point.
so we,
I don't have any opinion on that at all.
According to Whatcom County, and I did look into this, we're not permitted to rent out individual rooms in a home for money.
I think we can, but we can't have an extra dwelling unit on the property.
yeah, no
I looked
ADU.
into that, and I actually have the definition of what a vacation rental is, according to Whatcom County.
You're talking about just for an STR, or like renting somebody out for
renting a
a
room.
month?
30 days for less than
Yeah,
30
I was
days.
looking only at the state, I've not looked at anything.
So would it be relevant? if-
Period of less than 30 days in where the owner is not present in the rented unit during the rental period.
Correct, and then it follows, individual sleeping rooms shall not be rented.
Individually.
That is really
So
interesting.
that's the county.
So that's
And these regulations apply to us.
That is fascinating, isn't it?
So
That they,
that's, are you talking about a short-term rental?
That's
We're
less than
talking
30
about
days.
their definition of a
right.
vacation.
You can rent,
You can take a renter
right, yeah.
or,
For longer than 30 days, but it's the definition of vacation rental unit, according to the Whatcom County website, is vacation rental unit means a single-family dwelling unit or accessory dwelling unit, which, by the way, the ADUs are not permitted on the watershed if you have less than 10 acres. This is what I've learned. For compensation is rented as a single unit used to lodge individuals or families for a period of less than 30 days and where the owner is not present in the rented unit during the rental period. And then it says, individuals' living rooms shall not be rented individually.
that is bizarre, that they don't allow rent a room, allow you.
Yeah, that's weird.
Someone asked, I don't have any problems at all. If someone wants to get a room out.
What's interesting is that that final sentence is in the definition of a vacation rental unit. Someone might argue that if you want to rent a room to an individual on a more permanent basis,
Right.
you can do that.
As a roommate, basically.
I'm sorry, I want to correct myself. It actually says short-term rental does not include any of the following: a dwelling that is occupied by the owner for at least 6 months during the calendar year and in which fewer than 3 rooms are rented at any time. So they're saying that if it's owner occupied, we could have community definitions.
Does the higher
Well,
entity
it's
take?
it's saying it's not. This is saying you can't. I know lots of people who rent rooms out.
Well, you know, this first meeting is really just to
30-day basis.
work on all these different issues.
No.
Anthony, I would like to thank you very much, you and your wife, for participating in this. You bring a perspective that I certainly don't have. Ariel, you too. You know, we're going to disagree about some things, but let's keep talking about it, you know?
No, thank you. I do appreciate that, and I do look forward to working with all of you. And hopefully we can find something that we can all be happy with and move forward.
Okay, so I'll put together some notes from what I took today, but I would like to really focus on the registration and what that would look like and how much that would solve some of our problems. It would solve quite a few. Then I'll put together a Google Drive where we can all share notes until we meet again. And is 5:30 good with everybody then? Change it? Is that?
And maybe, should we just take out small bites, like next meeting, we'll just discuss the registration? And then we could decide what we're gonna do the next meeting, instead of tackling this whole thing at once?
How long do we have for each meeting?
Hour and a half?
Yeah, I mean, we could, we'll have to decide what's going to be in the registration, who's going to make the determination of how many parking spaces are allotted to this house.
Yeah, so I'm thinking we think about that over the week and then that'll be our
Next meeting is
discussion.
next week.
Yeah.
I am going to start to put together a directory. I don't use Airbnb a lot. I don't have an account. But like I said, I looked today and there were a whole bunch of homes that I know are available.
Airbnb is weird where sometimes if you're in the wrong category, it won't show you a different.
Okay, so for me, I haven't done this, but I am going to start to put together a directory of Airbnbs in Gate 1.
Yeah, just don't put in any parameters. Don't put in any dates,
dates or
any
anything.
occupancy.
Can you do that?
Yeah, you can just search for, yeah.
And there's VRBO.
I looked on Airbnb and VRBO and again, only one of the 8 houses I know around, only one showed up.
Maybe they all got scared besides because they knew you were on the task force.
I have not been vocal about this at all. Again, I've had no, the people that own these short-term rentals are friends. They're community members, and, you know, I recognize that people have, property owners have rights.
Well, I think that, you know, there's no mechanism to register, so we have no idea. I'm thinking that a lot of these people will just voluntarily register. If If not, I mean, there may be some penalties. If we decide that you have to register, there may be some penalties if somebody doesn't register within 6 months. And I'm just throwing that out there. But I don't think we're going to be able to just find them through the county or through Airbnb. We're not going to find everybody. I think somehow we need to make it easy enough for them to register and kind of work within our system and just make it work for everybody. So we can't, we're not going to, it's not going to be helpful if we get, 50% of them.
If we generally agree that there will be some line in the sand drawn that will grandfather people in, is it unreasonable for us tonight to recommend to the board that immediately they request people register? That kind of draws the line in the sand.
Yeah, I think that's a little,
You're worried about what's going to
Yeah.
happen in the next 3 months.
no, yeah, I think we need to come up with something a little bit more than just saying the board do this, because the board the board is not a free-for-all board. We cannot, we are an advisory board. I mean, we can't just do this. The board doesn't have the power to just do that. So,
I'm looking to make some progress.
well, we are making
Yeah,
progress.
we made progress already.
We are making progress.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe we need pie next week, I don't know.
Well, at our meetings, we do have announcements for each committee and task force. And
Yeah.
just kind of give them a sense of where we're headed, warn them that you've got some things that you want to talk to them about.
I don't think I'm alone. I'm just one of the people willing to talk about it.
I think everybody, even the owners, would agree that we don't want this meeting to do that.
The
That's-
next board
that's what
meeting,
can hear-
next board meeting listed online is June 12th.
But, so Daniel sent out an email today or yesterday
I've sent a lot of emails for
that basically says we're gonna do this every week.
every week.
Yes.
Oh, you mean, I'm sorry, you
Letting
said
you
board,
know
meeting.
the
You
board
said board
meeting.
meeting, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about presenting to the board, so the next board meeting is.
Oh, right.
So
I
at,
know we're going to be here next week.
at the board meeting, we'll give an update on our progress.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
If I bring these two people who have contacted me next week, then it's gonna take up the whole.
Well, do they have any expertise on short-term registrations?
That's find out. Maybe what I'll do is I'll say, you got 10 minutes.
Or maybe you could ask them their area of expertise, and then the next, or you could just send an email to Daniel and all of us saying, I have these people, this is their expert. Because sometimes people might be an expert
Their own mind.
in their own mind.
Or in an area that's not applicable.
Yeah, like they might, so I think
we'd at least hear them out. I mean, they could stand at
Yeah.
the podium and
they could,
introduce themselves, and if we need to talk to them further, we can.
Yeah, I think,
I just don't want to waste their time of coming and talking to us about a subject we're not ready to discuss yet.
I think what I'll do is I'll ask them to come, introduce themselves, give us a general overview. What
Give them their bio,
Yes, and then maybe we can call them back occasionally and
definitely.
of course, I'm sure they're gonna watch this video. So, where's the camera? I don't know.
I didn't mean they were experts in their own mind. Yeah, just other people, no. Why is mine?
Yours is coming through the speakers.
I think that's the camera right there.
Yeah, they're behind, camera's behind.
I think yours is coming through the speakers and no, I don't think anybody else's.
Yeah, why is Lori coming through the speakers but nobody else? But nobody else. Am I coming through?
You have to get really
It is
close.
mine's not really doing that.
Okay.
That's why we gave Mike quiet.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.